All right. Thanks everyone for joining our VITALIZE Angels September pitches. Before we get started, I first just really quickly wanted to introduce our new VITALIZE Angels community manager. Her name is also Caroline, and she joined us in the last couple of weeks, and we're really excited to have her. And I'm just going to pass it over to her to give a really quick intro, and then we'll dive into the pitches for today.
Sweet. Thanks, Caroline. Hello, everybody. I'm Caroline, as mentioned. I'm in Denver, Colorado. And just a little bit about my background. I started, I guess you would call it my career, at a Fortune 5 company in DC doing sales. And then from there, I wanted to change. So I moved to Colorado, was a ski bum for 2 seasons. And then when COVID hit, I started working at a startup accelerator. So I was working with managing a community of founders, outbound sales processes, kind of a little bit of everything. And I just joined the VITALIZE team, and I'm super excited to be here and get to know everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, Caroline. So you guys will see more communications coming from Caroline in the future. But with that, I want to be conscious of David's time. We've got two pitches today, as always. So the swarm and then unveil. Each one will be a 10-minute pitch followed by 10 minutes of Q&A, as always. And then we will move forward with just one company into diligence and hopefully investing in after we gather survey results from you guys, our members. We will also do our diligence training next week for whoever wants to get involved in diligence on whichever company we move forward with. Please remember to mute your lines when you're not talking today, and you can unmute to ask questions live during the Q&As. With that, I'm going to introduce our first company. This company is The Swarm, which is a next generation people and relationship data platform. We believe this is a huge space. We've seen a lot of companies recently trying to tackle this problem, and we think David and his team are doing a really nice job. Just in full transparency, we were actually originally looking at this company for our VITALIZE fund, and then did diligence on the company for our fund and love the founder, love the company. Ultimately just realized it was slightly too early for our fund. The contract sizes were a little bit smaller than what we're looking for our fund. However, David has recently signed some larger contracts just in the last week or two, and has some good momentum in that regard. So I'm excited for him to share more about his company and about the round that he's raising. Without further ado, I will let David take it from here with his pitch.
Perfect. Thanks, Karen. Nice to meet everyone. My name's David. I'm based in the Bay Area. I'm from Australia originally. That's the accent, but been here for about 10 years. This is my second startup. My last one was acquired by Sequoia Capital. It was the first and only acquisition. It was an outbound recruiting automation company. They were in this build versus buy decision. And I was then in-house at Sequoia as a founder in residence for a couple of years, built them about 12 different tools when I was there, and worked pretty closely with the data science team to map Sequoia's extended network and to be able to leverage all of the relationships the firm had to be able to support our portcos. So the Swarm sort of spun out of some of that early proof of concept work I did with Sequoia and the data team there. The thinking is, why doesn't every company have access to a platform where they can leverage their relationships? Now, we all have LinkedIn as individuals, which is great. And it's useful for individuals and audience building. But why isn't there a LinkedIn for companies? From something where you can harness the collective network of your organization. And that's what the Swarm set about to build. About 3 years ago, we started. So we've closed a pre-seed and seed round, and we're now doing this insiders round to prime us before we do a larger Series A next year. At this point, we've closed about 70 paying customers on the SaaS side. About, I think, 1,200 companies have been onboarded. It's kind of a PLG motion. But as Caroline mentioned, we've seen this rapid revenue growth over the last 4 months. We've 4x'd our revenue in the last 4 months, mainly from data. So this data products that we started to commercialize. And what we're doing is we're able to support companies who are building these large databases. So probably the biggest one we just closed a couple of weeks ago is clay.com. And they have a platform for sales teams to be able to build lists of customers, and they need the freshest data possible to keep all of that up to date. Around 2% of folks will change their jobs every month. So within a year, almost a quarter of your database is going to be stale if you don't do anything. And we have a pretty unique angle where we're able to harness the collective power of all of the swarm users to form this swarm of folks who can then build this data pipeline. So there's a couple of different ways that works. One is that all of our SaaS users, about 5,000 or so users, have our Chrome extension installed, and they're pulling in their full LinkedIn network every week. And this is using the GDPR and CCPA regulations, which allow a user to request a copy of their data. And we're then able to see just the current title and company. So we don't get all the information, but we're able to cross-reference that data against our database and have this pipeline of fresh profiles and job changes that we're picking up, and then able to sort of commercialize that database and feed that to these other larger companies. So sales engagement tools like Clay.com, chatting with Apollo.io as well at the moment about bringing them on. And then data teams at VC and private equity firms. So Sequoia Capital, for example, their data team purchases our data. It's about like a 24K ACV contract. And the Clay.com contract's about 100K. And then we have this long tail of these SaaS customers. So you can sign up yourself if you want to try it out for free directly on the website. And I'll just share my screen just to show you. This is our website, and you can kind of sign up for a free version here. But yeah, we've now got over 3,000 companies who have been trying it out and giving us feedback, but we're still in beta. We actually haven't publicly launched yet. We'll probably do that early next year in conjunction with like a product hunt launch and like a larger kind of PR and media blitz, and then really use that momentum to push us into the Series A kind of territory, getting to 3, 4, 5 mil ARR by kind of this time next year. In terms of current traction, at the moment, we're just crossed over the 600K ARR mark. And as I mentioned, that it's about 4x in the last 4 months. And we're on track to cross the 1 mil mark by the end of the year. And the next big product that we're working on is this relationships API product. So the people data, that's very useful for enriching and keeping fresh profiles up to date. But the relationships API is really the kind of holy grail of like what we've been building for the last 3 years. This allows us to passively map the network of any company using only their domain. And then the secret sauce is we're then going to be pushing that data into the interface that these teams are already living and breathing in. So setting up partnerships with Clay.com, with Apollo.io, with Gong, with Warmly, with Common Room, with all of these different sales engagement platforms that revenue teams live and breathe in every day. And partnering with them means we get to sell into their established customer bases of hundreds of thousands of customers all at once. So that's the trajectory for the next 1 to 2 years, and how we kind of take this from a 1 to 2 mil ARR company to a 2 to 10 or 20 mil ARR company in the next kind of year or two. So happy to sort of answer any questions on that. I can maybe just give you a quick bit more on the team, who's behind this. So myself, we've already talked about. My co-founder and CTO, he had a previous exit to Uber, and he's been splitting his time between San Francisco and Poland. We've established a really strong senior engineering team in Krakow in Poland. And our chief growth officer has about a decade experience working with startups and sort of closing both small and large ACV deals. So happy to talk more about that. But yeah, it's a nice kind of lean team. And what that does mean is actually we can, with the current revenue growth, actually reach profitability by mid next year and be in a really nice financial position, in terms of lining up that Series A for later next year. But yeah, I'll pause there and kind of open it up to any questions folks might have.
David, just to kind of recap, would you mind just giving the overview on the round once again, just so we can kind of end with that?
Sure,
and where we're at with everything? That would be great.
Yeah, so round dynamics. So we're raising a 1 mil round at the moment. It's at an 18 mil post money valuation on a safe. The last round was the seed round, which we did at a 15 mil post. So there's a slight bump up from that. But obviously for the Series A, we'd be doing like a 10 to 12 mil round, and that would be at a like 50 to 60 mil post. That would be later next year. So we're just doing a smaller round at the moment. We've got 800K that's committed from existing investors. Almost all the existing investors are coming back for this round, including 500 Global, Kevin Mahaffey, the founder of Lookout. We've got Peter from Unpopular Ventures, Altair, Contrary Capital, January Capital, and a few other angels who are jumping on as well. So looking for 1 to 2 new investors, and love the idea of being able to get a group of angels and operators and a syndicate of folks who can support us in kind of what we're doing. And I always find it the most helpful people to have on the table.
Awesome. Thanks, David. We do have one question in the chat to kick it off that I'll read out loud, which is, thanks for sharing your journey. How did you build your partners in the early years of development?
Yeah, so when we first kicked off, we started building with some design partners, and honestly, these were all folks from my network, either other founders that I've worked with at Sequoia or other companies and other investors that I knew, and then we just kind of grew organically from there.
David, hey, you've got great pedigree, great track record. Is your only data source LinkedIn, and what are your customers doing with the data that they get from you?
Yeah, great question. So in terms of the data source, we have a few different vendors. So our users are extracting their data from LinkedIn. We also purchase data from traditional data vendors like Core Signal and ProxyCurl and a few other ones to beef up our internal database. And there's some job change tracking vendors that we purchase data from as well, who do these like search engine queries to be able to detect has there been changes. And that's like one company's called Live Data Technologies. But more interesting, what are folks actually doing with this data, especially the SaaS application users? So what they're doing is they're combining their networks to form this collective network using the Swarm software. And these are their LinkedIn connections, their email and calendar connections, and their previous colleagues. And that last one is something that we map for them. So when you sign up for the Swarm, we look in our database and find all of the employees of your company and then map everyone's previous colleagues just passively in the background. And then folks can layer in their other connections from LinkedIn, from email, calendar. And then you have this big database of all of your warmest relationships that you as a firm can use for sales. So find warm intros into target accounts, for recruiting to find candidates, and then investors and VCs use it for diligence, deal sourcing, and portfolio support.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
If anyone else has questions, please feel free to jump in and ask it out loud, or put it in the chat and I will ask out loud. I have one, David, that I think folks might be interested in, which is if you could kind of touch on like what's the core differentiator, just because we are seeing a lot of products trying to do a similar thing in market right now, like what sets you apart?
Yeah, so we've seen a few attempts at this network management tool. There's a few kind of alternatives that are out there that you may have seen, like Connect the Dots or Comsor or Atlas, Village. There's a few folks out there. I'm pretty familiar with most of them. I think the big differentiator is that we are evolving more as this data company, where we have our own database of around 600 million profiles that we are keeping fresh and up to date. And it's actually so valuable that we're able to sell it for 100K contracts. Now that by itself is an interesting business, but it's not like a venture scale, kind of business in terms of the differentiation, the proprietary, data that we have. So what we're able to build on top of that database is then what gets really interesting. And that's where this relationships API that we're about to release is the huge differentiator, where two things: not only do users, we're able to passively map the network, and users don't have to invite other people to connect their networks, which we've learned by this point doesn't work. It's just at scale, over 100 users, the participation rate is just too much friction that you're just not going to get 100, 500, 1,000 people to all sign into some platform and connect their LinkedIn and download a Chrome extension, especially when you're even trying to get investors to do it. It just doesn't work. So what we've instead pivoted into is to map the network in the background. And then the second part of that strategy is to be pushing the data then into the interfaces that they're using, especially for sales and revenue teams. You talk to any salesperson, try to convince them to change their workflow or to sign up for some new tool. It's an incredible amount of friction. So instead, we can meet them where they are in these sales engagement tools, in their CRM, in LinkedIn, in terms of the sidebar, and the usability of that is going to be way higher. So that's our sort of strategy and how we differentiate, and I think kind of how we're going to win in this new go-to-network category that's emerging.
Very helpful. Thank you. Any other questions from folks? We do have a couple minutes left.
Maybe just one final point I'll make is just around the market opportunity. I think we've had a few investors sort of say the opportunity ahead is something on the scale of LinkedIn meets Salesforce, and it's in the 150 to $200 billion range in terms of the opportunity that's ahead. This is a huge trend, and we are very well positioned to capitalize on it. So happy to talk more about it, but yeah, appreciate everyone taking the time.
David, one last thing that our investors are usually curious about is, what would you say would be a possible exit opportunity? Would it be like an acquisition by a LinkedIn or a Salesforce, or what do you think?
Yeah, so there's a few obviously different exit scenarios. Acquisitions would be the most likely by a large strategic like Salesforce, who has an appetite for acquiring these kind of companies, or by a private equity firm, at some point as well. So those would be the probably two most likely in the next 3 to 5 years.
Great. Last call for questions. Otherwise, we will let David get on with his day.
David, what of your data set of your 600 million profiles is proprietary, and what of this is just aggregation?
Yeah, so it's all of the fresh profiles that we're picking up. So about 2 to 3 million job changes we're detecting every month, and that's proprietary, and that's what's super valuable. The larger data set is a bit more of a commodity that a lot of other companies have, and you can piece that together by just buying flat files from different data vendors. But the really valuable golden data is that fresh profile data, fresh job change data that we're picking up.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, David, for your time. We really appreciate it. And we will be in touch with you in the next few days after our members get back to us with our interest survey. So we really appreciate your time, and have a great rest of your day.
Perfect. Thanks again, everyone. Bye.
All right. Bye, David. Okay. Caroline B is our next presenter. Casey in the web.